We're officially live. Hey everyone, how's it going? Natalie here, also known as the Animal-Based Babe, and here with me is Sucha Kumar. I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name first.
Kumar. Either way works.
Kumar, also known as Primal Yogi from Live Bliss. How's it going?
It's going good. It's so cool to be here with you in Colorado. This is so exciting.
Yeah, all the way from Miami, Florida.
All the way from Miami, Florida.
So I want to start by just getting to know you a little bit personally, even though I've really gotten to know you over this last week. We just came back from the Grounded Retreat in Moab, Utah, where we got to meet in person for the first time and get grounded.
Yeah, seriously. And we were just saying this in the car, but like using social media to like make real friends is the way to do it. So It's been so cool to meet you in person. It feels like we've known each other forever. The retreat experience was like so special to be able to connect with you the entire week, but also get to like work together, but like participate in things together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's
yeah,
awesome.
It was such a cool experience. Okay, let's dive right in. First of all, who are you?
Okay, so like I would say American, but also like my roots are from India. So I've been born and raised actually in Southern California, and the move to Miami, Florida was just a few months ago, something I've been kind of manifesting. I was about to say 24. I just turned 25 years old, but the more and more I grow up, feels like I'm very like disconnected to age. So that's cool. I have been diving into the animal-based lifestyle for the past 2 years now, which is crazy. And I spent years being vegan, which I'm sure we'll dive into.
Yeah.
Movement is huge for me, and just everything, all things primal living. So that's kind of even how Primal Yogi, like that name, evolved. The other thing that's been a huge foundation for me is yoga. So those are all just like different things that are, I would say, my interests, but all of it just dives back to primal roots.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. When did you start eating plant-based, and what was the motivation behind that?
So if this counts, like I actually dove into more being pescatarian, which I would say was still kind of heavy on the plant-based back in high school. But back then, it was kind of just because I thought it was cool, and partially because I was really obsessed with like weight loss and just like looking a certain way, and I figured a lot of the unhealthy foods I was eating tended to actually be animal-based. And then when I was about 18 years old, I got obsessed with environmental sustainability and found that eating vegan, or so I had thought based on the information I had, was kind of like the best sustainable solution, the best way to be kind of a conscious human. And so that really set me forth, and then diving into all the health benefits of plant-based eating. So I really transitioned kind of from pescatarian to being full on vegan for about 4.5 years, I would say, and being really strict at that point too.
What was strict vegan for you? What did that look like?
Yeah, so like, I mean, to put it simple, I think if someone's plant-based hearing this, you kind of know, but like I wouldn't have honey, and I know a lot of people like will still have some honey, like no cheats or anything. It was just like super vegan. I was a part of a lot of like vegan groups, did vegan events, did all of the vegan things. I would say still like really welcoming of all other things, but I was definitely super biased, and I believed that was like the way, like we should all go vegan. I was definitely there.
Yeah. So what was the transition like you said this started at like 18, which is pretty young, to creating a career in this vegan health fitness space?
Yeah, it's an interesting transition, and I'll say like the number one thing, whatever lifestyle you're doing, whether that's like movement or even just waking up early in the morning, or like any habit you want to create, any lifestyle change, the people you surround yourself with really matters. So at that time when I was like 18 turning 19, I just started like getting in a different relationship, and we actually decided to go vegan together. And that definitely made it like way easier because like living together, we're doing all like the vegan things together. And I was living in San Diego at that time. I love San Diego. They have a huge vegan community. And so just getting involved with events like and so many vegan restaurants, it just made it so easy to like live that lifestyle. I will say that's probably more of like vegan privilege. Not everyone has all of that available to them if trying to go plant-based. So that transition, I would say, was really easy to dive into, and I did kind of fall in the trap of all of the vegan alternatives for the first like year and a half before I learned about whole food plant-based, which is very different from eating vegan and like kind of all the processed foods or the alternatives. So it wasn't like I missed any food, because they're definitely, that industry is really great at like replicating foods to taste a certain way.
I was plant-based myself for 3 years, and I can say that I never missed anything because you had all the food, all the junk food, except for the protein. That's probably the only thing my body missed, but my brain didn't know it.
Yeah, and
maybe
it's really interesting you say that, because I always saw like the Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger and everything trying to replicate like just red meat. But up until that point I was plant-based, I had never had like actual red meat. I think I told this to a few people, but like I had an In-N-Out burger a few times when I was younger, and that was the only time I had something that was red meat. In-N-Out's kind of like a higher end fast food chain based in California and a few other locations, and they're supposed to do a really fresh burger, but that never like exploded my mind. I was never like, I'm dying for this burger, I can't go vegan. So I never had like a good piece of steak, or I had never primed my body to like what it felt like to have red meat. So even when I was vegan, I would say it was easier for me because I didn't miss it. I would say seafood and fish was the biggest thing I missed, because I love seafood.
Yeah. So you stepped into this very plant-based cultural immersion, it sounds like, in California, but it sounds like a lot of that may have stemmed from how you grew up, right? Like you grew up in a vegetarian household.
Yeah, I would say like my parents definitely had fish here and there, but definitely heavier on the plant-based side. And coming from like an Indian background, cows are more sacred, and I still think they're so sacred because they're like the holy mother grail for everything. And I have a totally different perspective on that now, which we'll dive into. But in India, traditionally, the cows seen like as a mother, and they provide milk, and they're there to like nurture, and you just don't eat red meat. And my mom's side of the family especially is like very vegetarian. My grandma is vegan without even knowing she's vegan. So it wasn't something that was like a thing. I remember, if at all, when I was really young on swim team, like I remember I loved like pepperoni pizza, but after I just like kind of gave in and like heard all the media, I was just like, no, I'm not gonna eat like any pork or anything like that, even though I like loved bacon and pepperoni pizza.
Isn't it crazy that something like pepperoni pizza we associate as an animal food, even though it's hardly any meat, really?
Yeah, it's barely any meat, like definitely dairy, but mostly like a lot of gluten.
So. Gluten and sauce that probably has sugar in it. Who knows?
Yeah, crazy.
Okay, so you transitioned to whole food plant-based. So when did Live Bliss come out? Because I know you had that company as a vegan, right?
Yeah. So I was already fully vegan, or I like to say plant-based, for about a year and a half or so, and the community in San Diego was really inspiring to me, just seeing how open people are. And I think any vegan or plant-based person can relate to the question of like, how do you get your protein? And like you definitely can get your protein when you're plant-based, to be fair. And I was also doing a lot of bodybuilding at that time, like a lot of weightlifting, trying to actively, in layman's terms, like get shredded, but basically like stay lean but build muscle, and have a lot of like high energy output, which I feel like I optimized as best as I could at that time. But like, you know, I would say getting more information out there for people as far as like, you can still get all the protein you need, and you can be fit, and you can have like this conscious perspective. That's what really sparked Live Bliss. I started putting together events that bridged together yoga, which I mentioned is kind of my foundation, but also fitness, more of like HIIT workouts, which I really loved. And at that time, no events were really bringing that all together. And then we'd always finish with some kind of like plant-based food or snack. And like, I hate to say this, but a lot of the vegan community and industry is like very unhealthy. Like, it's vegan, but it's not focused on like being fit, and a lot of the people don't resemble that either. And so I was like, there needs to be like more people like Nimai Delgado, which is like the famous vegan bodybuilder, or people like that are promoting that. And so I wanted to really set that forth with the events originally.
Yeah, so you held these events all over San Diego, and so you're trying to, like you said, bridge this gap of being physically fit while eating plant-based. Did you find that you had to try really hard to fill that role?
I think people were really open to it. I think people came to the events just because they were more so fun, and I definitely got a lot of people who are plant-based, so that's been a really interesting transition as of recently, because I've basically been shifting my entire community by like not only being animal-based, but providing a lot of education and being open with my journey about that. But I would say, as far as growing that community, it was pretty like fluid, and people were really open to it. You definitely get a lot more love spreading plant-based eating versus like animal-based eating, but the biggest goal was always like long-term healthy heart, so like your heart health, your body, and the earth. So my idea was like, you know, being healthy with your body and mind, but also promoting long-term sustainability of the planet. And so at that time, my knowledge and experience was that being vegan was best for your health and best for the planet. So that was my intention with it back then.
Okay, so you created this company, you built this community, you're doing live events all over San Diego. Your health is going really well. It sounds like everything was perfect. So what shifted?
Yeah, really interesting. So everything was perfect as far as I knew. I didn't realize that so many of the symptoms I had back then were like not normal. I didn't know that bloating was, you know, not normal. I didn't think that the type of shits I was taking were, you know, not normal, or like, you know, losing some hair, which I realized later in the day, or just even all the acne that I was getting. I kind of normalized a lot of that around like, oh, it's just my hormones balancing, or, you know, this is how it's supposed to be with the fiber. And even the energy crashes, everyone normalized like a midday crash and having coffee in the middle of the day to, you know, you just need to do that. So I normalized so many things. So I really think I was only able to even realize the benefits of bringing animal foods back in after like kind of accidentally getting into animal-based eating. So at that point, everything was good for me. The other thing I would say really stood out for me is if you are trying to get an adequate amount of protein while being plant-based and get all of the essential nutrients you need, you do need to for sure supplement, especially with vitamin B12. And if you're trying to stay on the leaner side without gaining too much weight, for most people, they do need to take some type of protein powder. At that time, I didn't know that I should be supplementing with collagen either, and there's literally no such thing as vegan collagen, even though there's some places like promoting that. There's vegan foods that can promote collagen, like boosting, but not an actual like collagen source. And a few other nutrients that I wasn't getting. So I just wanted to, as I was getting back to my primal roots, I was like, I don't want to supplement anymore. So that kind of like dove me more into the exploration of animal foods.
Yeah, so you started to notice some nutrient deficiencies and started questioning if this was the most optimal diet, then you shouldn't have to supplement, right?
Exactly. I was like, already with movement, I was like, okay, I found a primal way of moving without having to depend on the gym and equipment, and, you know, even like creating a circadian rhythm with the sunrises, sunsets, like spending more time in nature. But the one thing that wasn't adding up to me was like the eating. And there's so many people that will say like, oh no, like our patterns show that we were like mostly plant-based back in the day, or like our primate friends or different kinds of monkeys eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. But after looking at the type of nutrients we really need, I was like, this is not matching up. It's not normal to eat like tofu all the time, which I was having a lot of tofu and tempeh. Even taking out gluten, like still had to depend on that. A lot of nut butter, which like now taking out nuts, I'm like, holy crap, like they were like impacting me like crazy. And then again, like B12 supplementation, and then just a lack of so many things that I was like, there needs to be another way. Like I tried so hard eating whole food plant-based. I'm like, there has to be a way I can get all of those nutrients from plant foods. And like, I was just like, there isn't, and no one's questioning this. They're just normalizing it. And like all the industry is normalizing supplementation, medicine, pharmaceutical, all of that stuff.
Yeah, because there's money in that.
Yeah.
Right? There's money to be made.
Yeah.
So now you're questioning all of this. Where did you start? That sounds like a really overwhelming place to be. What did you do next?
Yeah, so it was very accidental. About 2 years ago, I decided to kind of like quit everything in San Diego and go on a adventure to live in Thailand and India for a few months. My home base is in India, as far as where all my family is, so I was definitely able to see family, but I was also doing my yoga teacher training, 300 hours in Rishikesh, which is in the Himalayas, and I was really involved in martial arts at the time, so I was doing Muay Thai training in Thailand. And right before that, I would say I was like, what I had thought back then was like on point eating. Like I was eating like bodybuilder style vegan like meals. I was probably the leanest I'd ever been. I was kind of like starving myself in a way, as far as like even like using fasting in an unhealthy way. I would say now coaching people, I know how to use it in like a very healthy way, but I was kind of using that as a mask to decrease all the inflammation that the plant foods were causing me.
I'm curious, like, so in that, you said you were the leanest you'd ever been. Was that really hard to achieve, especially where you are now? Was that like way harder than it should have been?
So hard. I feel like if I was eating animal foods like the way I'm eating now, it'd probably be effortless. Like what I'm doing right now, I'd probably say like the only difference is like maybe I would just eat a little bit less, like not add so much butter to my coffee in the morning, and that'd probably make a huge difference. But at that time I was like trying to trek. I was overtraining so much. And I will say, like, out of complete honesty, like especially the past few months with like cross-country moving, hosting a retreat, doing so many road trips, like I have not been consistent at all with my workouts. And at that point, like when I was the leanest I'd ever been and I thought I was on my A game as a vegan, I was probably training 2 hours a day. And I'm talking like weightlifting, HIIT workouts, on top of teaching yoga classes and just teaching multiple classes. You're almost like doing the workout with people. So it was a lot of work, which I had normalized because in the bodybuilder community and fitness community, it's just all training, all diet. You're so focused on that. And so like it was really not good for my mental health. I normalized like my periods being irregular. I just was like, cool, like I'm not really getting a period, which is great. Like I don't have to deal with it, which now diving into like my femininity, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did I normalize that? Yeah.
Okay, so you're like the fittest, leanest you've ever been. You're working out 2 hours a day. You're fasting. And then you said you went to India first?
India first, and all of the food in my yoga teacher training was vegetarian, so I was thrilled, but I was kind of stressing out about the fact that like some of these foods had ghee, but it's also really delicious. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna embrace it. This is more of like an Ayurvedic type of eating. And there was some dairy, Indian food, and Indian lifestyle uses a lot of dairy actually. And I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna like embrace it. So even going back to my family, I was like, I'm just gonna take in everything that my aunt and my grandma are making for me. And Thailand was actually, both places were very difficult to get the type of foods that I was eating back in the States. So like obviously there's no tofu there really that you can get, especially like high protein tofu. And then like kale, spinach, broccoli, like all of my staple greens, they were not there, and it simply just doesn't grow in that climate. There's some similar foods, and I remember like the one time I had some greens there, like it literally came out the back end exactly the way I ate it, like exactly. And I was so like obsessed with all of the superfoods, a lot of like Mark Hyman's work. I was a really big fan of that doctor. But I started questioning things even more, and I'm like, how is it kind of even fair to tell everybody you should be eating these superfoods and vegetables when they don't even grow everywhere? They're not, you know, able to be produced unless you do like mass monocrop agriculture and make it available for everybody. And so India and Thailand, where I realized, like, staying in small village towns there, I was like, they're only selling stuff that grow in this vicinity, and the stuff that are grown far away, like, you have to kind of drive to a big city to purchase them. So that is why I say kind of it was accidental. Like, I almost had to kind of force myself to incorporate foods that were not fully vegan. And I was never into like grains and legumes because I've always just been more on the like lower carb side. I actually tried to do keto as a vegan, which was like impossible unless you only have processed foods. So just trying not to have rice, I started to have to incorporate some eggs and a little bit of seafood.
Yeah. So did you say that you lived with or near your aunts and your grandma while you were there?
I spent like a couple of weeks with them on my mom's side and then my dad's side. So yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, so you're living there. Is this the first time that you've been there?
No, I've been there many times before, but I think this was the first time that I like really was trying to embrace the culture. When I was younger visiting, it was kind of just like, I have to like go see my family, like, you know, very disconnected.
I feel like coming from the States, one of the arguments, I guess, for plant-based eating, you hear the Indian culture brought up a lot. Vegetarian. So would you say that that was representative of like they're pretty healthy, or would you say not so much?
That's a really interesting point. So a lot of times when I talk about ancestral eating and diving back to our primal roots with people, they'll say, well, what about your ancestors? Like most of Asia is like basically eating like just rice. And what we don't address is like the agricultural, you know, revolution where we were like kind of started only growing so much grains and legumes in the past few hundred years versus like way back before then we can, you know, kind of guess that we had different sources of food. And I mean, I'll just say this from my personal like family and what I've seen around that area, but most people, they kind of fall into the category of skinny fat. If not, they are like overweight and pre-diabetic. So definitely not getting as much, nowhere close to the nutrition they need. My parents grew up actually pretty poor, and they would tell me like a lot of their meals was basically just like white rice porridge because that's all they could afford. And if you just look at the contents of rice, like it can get you by, which is why there was like the more grains and legumes kind of led to like population increase because they're getting people to survive. But to thrive, like there's like, you know, no way. My parents eat pretty healthy, but they're both pre-diabetic because for most of their life they were like the key growing phases of their life, like when you're a baby, when you're adolescent, teenager, those are the key phases, and they were just basically eating mostly rice.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I wonder, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the intermingle play of religion and, like you said before, seeing the cow as this sacred thing. You're not going to necessarily eat the cow, but you'll consume the dairy from the cow. But then also this high level of poverty. So had they had access to all the dairy, even maybe, let's just say dairy and eggs, that they wanted, do you think it would be a different picture?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So in one of the really cool books I read, The Big Fat Surprise, as I was diving into animal-based eating, they actually talked about a few like tribes and groups around the world that their main source of food was actually dairy. And that actually gave them a lot of the protein, calcium they needed, and fat content also. Very different dairy than obviously what's majority like sold in the grocery stores now. And I think like eggs also, they're kind of like a superfood. And so I do believe if they had access to like more dairy and eggs, their nutrition would be totally different. But because of the population and the poverty, just having so much dairy and eggs, I don't think it could keep up with the population. And that's where we kind of dive into like the sustainability and scalability
Yeah.
of everything. And I mean, just the biggest thing is like the education's not there. I think maybe people would prioritize like, you know, owning their own chickens and kind of creating like a coop if they had that knowledge. A lot of people have cows, but they're just milking them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, it just reminds me so much of this when you get into, you know, looking at the evolution of humans, how plant foods kind of became survival and fallback foods.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like the grains and legumes, which fall in that category. Even to this day, getting like actual vegetables in third world countries is very expensive because they're not going to thrive. It's going to be really hard to grow them. Whereas something that's like more indigenous to India, for example, would be coconuts, which I think is a great source, which that is like one of the plant foods where I'm like, okay, like I think this is great because it provides the coconut water, the coconut meat. You can use the shell for a lot of things, like the husk of it. But a lot of the plant foods, they're not naturally abundant there.
Yeah. So a lot of mono agriculture.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving forward, pretty much to where you are now. So how did you get from your trip? You were in India and then Thailand. You came back to the States. Then what happened?
Yeah. So when I came back from my trip, it was February of, I'm already losing track of time, February of 2020.
Okay.
And shortly after, so when I came back, I kind of like went back to my like plant-based vibe where I had access to like the amazing San Diego vegan restaurants and whatever I could cook at home with, you know, my lovely beloved tofu and all of those foods. But then, you know, we kind of got into quarantine and I decided to move back in with family at that time. And at this time I moved in back with my dad, and he, I would say, is not like a big red meat consumer, and he's still of the mentality for the most part of like eating, you know, lower fat, like eating definitely not any like fatty cuts of meat. But he did consume a lot of eggs and then like chicken here and there and seafood. So at that time I was like, you know what, like I want to kind of share that experience of eating together. So I definitely cooked a lot of plant-based meals, but I also took part in eating the other animal foods he was integrating. Still not any red meat at that time. But it started to feel good, and I started to like start craving eggs, which was really weird for me. And I was like, why am I just thinking about eggs? And at that time I was like still nervous even in front of my family because I'd been preaching the vegan lifestyle for years. And so for me to like have eggs or even any other animal foods in front of them, it was like, what? Like you're eating like meat now, or, you know, animal foods, even eggs. But I started craving eggs. So I started kind of leaning into that and just having more eggs. And then fast forward to meeting my now partner. We reconnected after years because we actually knew each other in high school. And, you know, everything clicked, but I'm like, like he eats so much red meat, and not just any red meat, he eats steak. And he is like a stickler about steak. Like wherever we went, made sure there was a grill, made sure he picked up ribeyes. And I was like, what is going on? And for the first, like, I would say a few months that I was with him, I was just like, no, like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I even made him like really nice tofu bowls. And for the record, he did say like that was the best tofu he'd ever had, but it still is like incomparable to red meat. And eventually it was one night, we'd gone to Joshua Tree. It was like the middle of the night, but he had picked up charcoal and ribeyes, and I was like, it's okay, I'm making my plant-based tacos inside. And he insisted on like doing his grilling thing outside in the middle of the night. And I was just like, you know what? I think we had drank a little bit too, so I was maybe just like, whatever. And I was like, I'll just have a piece. Like, I'll try it.
Yeah.
And it was like such juicy ribeye. I'm like salivating right now. And I was like, this is so good, but I didn't say it. I was like, I cannot let him know that I like it because I've been hating on this food for so long. And so in my mind, I was just like, okay, like I'll have one more piece. And then I just like kind of like let it. And I was like, okay, whatever. And we, you know, we were dating at that time, and I eventually, every time we would meet together, maybe it was like 2 times a month or max 3. If he was making some, I'd have a few pieces. And so that was like to the extent of red meat. But back home, I was like having a lot more salmon and eggs, which I felt really called towards. And sooner or later, I kind of worked my way up to when he would make steak. He was like, well, you're just going to start eating more of mine, so I'm just going to get you your own. I'm like, what do you mean? There's no way I could eat a whole ribeye. And eventually, a few months later, I did. But I was still not at that point where I was like, you know, going out of my way to buy red meat at home. It was just like not part of my identity. I was like denying it. I was still kind of embarrassed to share it on social media, although I did a little bit. And yeah, one thing led to another, and I just started being more intentional with it, and then kind of decided to go all in.
Yeah. So what does that look like for you now?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, the people you surround yourself with in your atmosphere is so important. So like if you are on this journey to healing, and if you are at all feeling any kind of judgment, or even if you have a supportive circle, but you feel like your identity is attached to a certain way of eating, and this does take, you know, some inner work and kind of ego breakdown, but I would say trying to get to a place, even if it's like a mini fridge or something, but something to where you are kind of taking your own accountability of what you're eating, where you're not tempted with foods, because it does take a little bit of kind of elimination to sometimes feel the healing of animal-based eating. And I'm so blessed now to be able to live with my partner in Miami, Florida, where it's just, you know, 2 carnivores, or technically 3 because our dog is a carnivore eating raw, you know, sharing a fridge and a freezer. And it's like the simplest fridge and freezer ever. But we sometimes have like seasonal fruit, and I started incorporating yogurt, which feels really good. And you know, a few times here and there, especially if it's like with family and certain things, I will have, you know, what we would consider, we call it kind of 87 fuel. So it's not our optimal fuel, just like filling up a car, which would be like 91 fuel. And that's, you know, in layman's terms, like a cheat meal, but pretty like, I would say, I don't like to use the word strict, but like all animal foods that we're having now.
Yeah. And how do you feel eating this way, especially when you think back to how you felt before, like that time before you went to India and Thailand, you were at your peak, you were peaking.
Yeah.
How does that compare to now?
It's crazy what I thought was like peaking for me. Like I feel so good now, and it almost feels effortless. Like this is me not putting in effort to, you know, to look a certain way, or to not feel bloated, or to not have any gas or anything. And it feels incredible to like feel all of these things so effortless. And I think I had such a smooth transition. So now reflecting back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. One of the really, really big things for me, having a past with more of like binge eating, was just like cravings. Like I was super addicted to sugary foods. And now realizing like it was because I was never really satiated. And it's also a habit you create in your mind, and that's where like neuroplasticity comes into play, and it's a network that you create. But satiating myself and almost like stuffing myself for a while with animal foods, and just like letting that part of me be okay with it, and embracing that, was really healing, because now I'm at a place where, you know, I could walk past like a bunch of like pastries or chocolate or whatever it is, and not be fazed and tempted at all. Even fruit these days is really intentional. It's not something that's mindless. Like I'm really like, you know, is the sun out? Am I feeling like, is this feeling primal to me? Like, is this like grown in this area? Yeah, it's crazy how I feel now, and how much I normalized. If I felt how I felt when I thought I was peaking now, I would not be able to hang. Like, I don't know how I did it.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy when you finally feel satiated for the first time? I don't think I really knew what that word meant until I allowed myself to eat as much animal protein and fat as I wanted.
Yeah, and the animal fat is huge. Like, saturated fat and just animal fat in general is like, has so much hate, so much misconceptions around it. And the animal fat was what was key for me. Like, that's why for me, like, I don't even consume really like any poultry or like chicken or any kind of lean meat, like I will go for the fattiest meat I can. I love that I finally found someone, Natalie, who will like, you know, devour like the fat of the ribeye or the New York that we'll eat together over the past week. But
eat off the bone.
Like, yeah, literally, and just embrace that. But that was so satiating for me. And, you know, even with female hormones or just anyone's hormones in general, to regulate that and realizing like you need fat and maybe you need a lot of it too, where as most plant-based diets are kind of lower on the fat side. And if you are having fat, your fat sources are from kind of like unsustainable sources like nuts, or I mean nuts is like a big one, or seeds. And if you are doing oils, then oils, which vegetable oils definitely are good to cut out, and then like too much coconut, so those are kind of like imbalanced.
Yeah. Okay, so a long beautiful journey of health and exploration and discovery. So you were like plant-based, and very publicly plant-based.
Yeah.
Your family was vegetarian, and now you're the opposite, animal-based, maybe even carnivore, some might say. So what is this like for you? And as far as, you know, opening up on social media about what you eat now and that you grew, you evolved and changed, and with your family as well.
Yeah, it's so crazy because I had no idea where this would go, and I feel like the reason I had so much resistance, like I can't even imagine, because anyone who's plant-based is already going to have a lot of resistance towards eating animal foods. It's part of like the identity. It's what we believe falls in like the morals and values of us, whether it's like health, or sustainability, or like ethical reasons, which are kind of the top three. But it's something that I like created as a foundation of my business, and I identified with it. I had, you know, plant-based on my IG bio for like so long as well. And everyone kind of associated me with like the plant-based information I was sharing and the lifestyle. So I remember, I mean, the way I am is just like, I have to be transparent on social media. So I was never like hiding anything. Sometimes that I had steak, I would be like, maybe I should share this, maybe I shouldn't, because like me, like with a huge piece of steak, like even for me, I was feeling so much guilt at first. Eventually I started sharing more about it. And when I decided like earlier this year to dive into full, you could call it carnivore, just to experience that lifestyle, there was just like no denying that this was kind of like the path for me right now, and how much healing it was giving me, and all these symptoms that I had, and like it completely, them vanishing because of this lifestyle. And it came to that point where I was like, no matter how much hate I'm getting from it, no matter how guilty I'm feeling about it, like this is something that I need to share, because I've always been focused on long-term health and healing. And it really changed when I learned about regenerative agriculture too, which gave me a huge like eye-opening perspective, because that's the other thing, like diving back to our primal roots, we don't want to do something that's unsustainable. And I was like, what are the patterns? Like, how did our earth exist years ago when we were just like thriving off of meat? I've definitely gotten I would say not a lot, but like a good amount of backlash just based on like the community, but I've gotten a lot more support and a lot of people opening up as far as like, hey, thank you so much for sharing this. Like maybe they're still not open to sharing it quite yet, but it's something that people really appreciate, because especially as a woman, it's like not very encouraged for us to eat a huge piece of steak, especially like fatty, you know?
Yeah. And at this point, does your family support your animal-based decision, or do they just think you're insane?
So, I mean, I think now looking at it, they're like, okay, she went through like a vegan phase. And they probably think that maybe I'm going through like a really extreme carnivore phase. But I think when I just break down the science and information to them, they're very open-minded to it, and it makes sense for them. my brother has always been like more into bodybuilding, so he's just kind of ate everything. So for him, it's more of like talking to him about eating whole foods versus processed foods, and why like he doesn't need to supplement, because he's definitely of the mentality like maybe needing protein powder or creatine, which are all amazing stuff you can get from animal foods directly. My mom actually ate, she didn't finish it, but she almost ate our first ribeye, which is crazy because she had come to Utah a few days ago before the retreat, and you know, she's working through weight loss and just feeling better energy wise, and she's tried everything. But animal-based is the one thing she's never tried. And also just, you know, realizing that people do need to get fat adapted. That's one thing that I think people don't consider, and they immediately like, you know, they say animal-based eating is not for me, but there's so much metabolic healing that needs to happen. So she's been really open to it. And I think the science doesn't lie. Our history and our roots don't lie. So yeah, they've been adjusting to it. I think my dad's kind of like, okay, like he now feels comfortable that we can have like red meat together, and it's something he wouldn't really bring home and maybe just have out with his friends. So it's kind of cool to share that.
Yeah, and what's cool too is, yes, it sounds like a night and day shift from whole food plant-based to animal-based, but it sounds like your foundation was kind of the same. Like at the end of the day, it was about optimal health, it was about sustainability, and really what changed was information. Getting more information, and of course listening to your body as well.
Information and like feeling real satiety, like we mentioned before, like feeling satiety and realizing like if you are not healing yourself, like you really can't heal the collective, because if you are suffering, if you are not feeling your best, if you're dealing with all these symptoms, like you can't expect to perform at your best for people. And maybe some people can still do that plant-based. And if maybe you don't have, you know, a problem with supplementing a bunch, if that's worth it to you. But for me, I would say I still hold up the same morals and values. And I just chose like a different route with different information, more non-biased information, because a lot of the information we have is biased, and kind of people don't realize like, you know, a lot of the research, the published studies, that all has to come from funding, and the companies need to fund that. So we have to look at where the money's at, right? Like, because money talks. And so that, and kind of incorporating that, and really taking the more primal approach, as far as ethical, because I know that people are going to say like, you know, it's still an animal dying at the end of the day, but realizing from a more spiritual perspective that this is a life cycle. You know, there's a reason why cows or ruminant animals have multiple compartments in their stomach and they are able to digest grass a certain way, but we humans have a different kind of stomach and gut, and we are also meant to process and digest different foods. And so like realizing how that all works together and just showing gratitude, even meditating before you eat can be really nice, and not wasting food. All of these things are, you know, they create like a food philosophy, which I think can be really beautiful to follow.
Yeah. Okay, we're definitely going to have to do another podcast at some point, because I want to go more into the sustainability and the ethics, fasting, as well as hormones, but maybe we should save that one for another one.
It's a lot.
Okay, well, I want to hear how do I want to ask this? Okay, what's next for Primal Yogi and your company, Live Blissed? What's next?
Yeah, so really quick on Live Blissed, we mentioned before, like it started with just doing kind of different events around San Diego, and they were more 2-hour events, I would say 2 hours max. And last year we did our first retreat, which was actually in Utah. We just did our second retreat in Utah, and in between the past year we've done a few other retreats, everything from like a retreat where we actually all did a 72-hour fast, and another retreat where we incorporated more wine tasting, and thus far all of them had been fully plant-based until our most recent one, which Natalie was a part of, that was actually a lot more animal-based. And that was huge, because most retreats these days are kind of just your typical vegan eating and yoga retreat. So this was definitely different, definitely like different community audience that we're shifting to, but with the primal yogi, that's kind of everything that falls under the umbrella. I have a core coaching that I do with people, which is more focused on fasting, but more of a spiritual and conscious approach to fasting. And we can get into that in a different podcast, but I think it can be so healing, and there's a really fine line without taking fasting overboard and, overusing it like how I did before, but also a lot of people will just, have their coffee with cream and maybe even sugar first thing in the morning, and then snack throughout the night, and maybe even have a glass of wine to finish the day. And you're almost not giving your body any room to just rest. And so taking a really conscious approach to fasting, and this can be really individual, but that is big, which I focus on, which is called the Fit Fast. And it's just a conscious journey taking you through, I coach you through fasting. And then with Live Blissed, which everything falls under that umbrella, that is definitely focusing more on retreats. I just love more of the intimate experiences. And we were San Diego based, but my dream is to kind of really expand a lot more than just one state. And just doing Utah and having half the people from all different states has been amazing, but definitely more retreats. So that's something to kind of stay on the lookout for. Definitely more animal-based retreats, and everything primal living, from cold water therapy to hiking, to moving your body primally, to catching sunrises and sunsets with a circadian rhythm. Everything primal living wise.
Yeah, and I can absolutely attest to that. That was probably one of my favorite parts of the retreat. Well, it's hard to pick one, but the sunrises, and then the sunsets, and then the stargazing.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah, stargazing, we just never get the opportunity, and just to feel kind of that small, and also experience that type of darkness, because I know for a lot of people who do live in bigger cities with so much light and noise pollution, those are really important experiences that we realize, people coming on the retreat, even after 30-35 years on the planet, even more, they still had not experienced stars that way and seeing the Milky Way. So nature is a huge foundation, our circadian rhythm, diet, movement, and then also
community and tribe, which is really important to connect with people on a deeper level, get to share meals together, get to move together, all of that. Yeah, it was great. Okay, really quick, 2 more questions.
Yeah.
The first is, where can people find you? You personally, but then your company as well.
Yeah, so I would say Instagram is probably best. My username is at primal.yogi. And then Live Blissed is just at Live Blissed. And I've also been releasing a lot of videos on YouTube. So if you just look up Sucha Kumar, which is SuchaKumar, and I have a lot of videos and interviews and information, and also vlogs on there, which are kind of fun.
Yeah, and we will link to all of that in the show notes, because we have show notes. So we'll do that. And then last question, I would love to ask your advice, or advice that you would give someone who is considering animal-based, or maybe they've just started, they're intimidated, they're overwhelmed, maybe there's a little guilt. What advice would you give that person?
Oh my God, there's so much that I wish that I knew too. Yeah. I would say YouTube was my best friend, seeing and searching actively for other women, and for me personally, being a younger woman who fell in that category, who were basically recording themselves of them indulging with steak or butter or eggs, or just living that whole lifestyle, and seeing them thrive with that just made me feel normal. Because I think the biggest thing is this lifestyle, even though it's innate to us, it's primal to us, it has so much backlash with the society these days, and the family that you're living with, or a significant other, or community you're in, might be really unwelcoming to this, or kind of judgmental, or even if they're not, maybe they're not sharing the same plate as you at the dining table. And so normalizing that, and I kid you not, so many times I've been enjoying my steak and eggs while watching YouTube and seeing other people, and that just was there's other people out there. So I think trying to join that community I know like Steak and Butter Gal on YouTube does like a 30-day challenge, which I've joined before. And I know just like, you know, listening to Natalie's podcast, which I definitely did, and just even searching up that hashtag or those type of accounts on Instagram is really helpful. I was so scared because I was switching my community up and my audience from like being plant-based to animal-based. And actually in the last few months, it's grew substantially after like hitting a plateau, just for anyone who is like more business mindset, focusing on content or community.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the numbers of growth, like even meeting Natalie or other people where I'm like, you're literally like my friend now, like, and like making those kind of relationships because you connect on something that maybe not everyone connects about, and you're able to like speak and talk about the truth with each other. So really just switching up your, even if it's not your direct community circle of in person, like on virtually, that's such a great tool. That's such a healthy way to use social media and content that you're consuming to create more of a positive atmosphere that's more welcoming and makes you feel like not that you have to fit in, but that you are not abnormal or weird for, you know, eating the way you're eating.
Yeah, finding your tribe.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out in the animal-based studio.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so awesome. I'm so honored to be on here.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, last words of wisdom?
Ooh, okay. Kind of put me on the spot here.
This whole thing has been on the spot. You got it.
I would just say, I mean, this is something that Natalie and I are still discussing, but stay on the lookout for more retreats that are focused on animal-based eating, because I know that as much as like, you know, coaching or looking at videos or, you know, looking up recipes are great. Like if you want that in-person experience and to be around people who are on the same page as you, that just week immersion or even a few days can be such a game changer and can be really beautiful for finding that community. So on livebliss.com or at livebliss or either Natalie or my profile, if we have anything upcoming, you will see it there first and foremost. So definitely be cool to see some of your faces in person around, you know, exploring with nature, but all enjoying steaks together and all of the good things.
Ooh, you heard it here first. Stay tuned. All right. Well, I think that's it for this episode. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you guys.
All right. You know what we like to say? Eat a steak, get outside, and have fun.
Oh, I love that.